Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Knife Makers Friday 5. Have you been thinking about doing some improvements to your shop? If so, I've got some thoughts for you. You know, one of the most satisfying things to do in your shop is to upgrade your workspace. Now, I've been making some changes here in my workspace. I've been putting in some workbenches and stuff. And so I'll talk a little bit today about kind of my thoughts on upgrading your workspace and particularly about building workbenches. Also, stick around to the end because, you know, a lot of guys want to grind better knives with a grinding jig. So I'll answer some questions about the two jigs that I make, sitting right over there. And hopefully, you know, that'll not only answer some questions about those specific jigs, but, you know, help you guys maybe make some decisions about what kind of jigs would be good for you and what you can do with them. But first, a couple of announcements. Next week, April 9th through 11th, I will be at the Batson Bladesmithing Symposium, which is a fantastic bladesmithing event. It happens over in Tannehill, Alabama, just south of Birmingham. The Alabama Forge Council has been putting it on for a gazillion years, and it's a really fun time. I'll be doing a little presentation with Joey Berry from Pop's Knives. We'll be talking about grinding knives, maybe doing some taper tang knives, showing some of the jigs and fixtures and stuff that I make both for them and for my little outfit, Sorrells Tool. If, on the other hand, you live on the other coast and this is a little bit too much of a hike, I'll also be doing a presentation at the California Blacksmiths Association Spring Conference in Vista, California. That's just north of San Diego. So, you know, it's an easy day trip from LA and San Diego and various other places in Southern California. It happens at the Antique Gas and Steam Engine Museum, which I've never been to, but it sounds super cool. Anyway, I'll be there for the whole thing, which is from April 16th to the 18th. I'll be doing presentations. I'll be forging. I'll probably be doing some grinding, and I think they're having a bladesmithing competition that I'll be hosting or judging or something. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, I've heard that it's a great event, and I'm really looking forward to it. Finally, Blade Show Atlanta, the world's biggest knife show. Sorrells Tool is going to have a booth there. Blade Show Atlanta, if you've never been there, it is the world's biggest knife show. It's just, if you're interested in knives, fantastic place to be. It's June 5th through the 7th, just outside Atlanta in Marietta. If you're into baseball, I think the Braves are playing, and you can literally walk to the Braves stadium from the conference center. So anyway, good time to be had by all. I'll be there for the whole thing. I hope to see you there. Come by, stop in, say hi. Okay, at the end of the video, I'm going to answer a few questions that people have about the brick and the Pro Set grinding jigs that I make, and I'll give you a few hints about, you know, how to get the most out of them. First, though, I'll be showing off a few improvements that I've made here in the shop. You know, basically, what I've done is added some counter space. This was old counter space. This is new. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. This is my grinding room that we're in right here. I moved shops about 5 years ago, and hard to believe it's been that long, but it's been close to that at least. My old shop was basically a two-car garage, and you know, the grinder dust just got everywhere. It was just awful. You know, I was a full-time knife maker there, and so, you know, if you're making knives all day, you're producing an enormous amount of grinder dust, and it was just terrible. So one of the greatest blessings of this new space is that I've got this grinder space that I put all my grinders. I've got my blast cabinet. I've got a surface grinder. I've got all these tools, a little portaband, a bench grinder. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here, all of which produces lots and lots of dust. I'm able to isolate that. Anyway, in the corner here, this was a pre-existing thing, you know, first owner of this place fixed it up to his liking, and he made this counter over here Workbench, and it had an MDF top on it. Now, I'm in Atlanta. It is moist, it is hot, and both of those things together are the enemy of all things that are made out of wood and glued together. So this MDF, it was terrible. It was all falling apart, and this just was not a workable space. And what happened is I just piled up a bunch of crap on here, and it became just this big pile of dirty stuff. However, it's a nice little space, and so it was time to just get rid of all that crappy MDF and put in a better counter. So I did that. I added good old plywood in here, but it's you know, it's high quality plywood. And then over here, I added a whole new bench, and this is for these tools here, and I'll probably put a drill press on there too. You know, basically what happened is I have some tools that I used in here other than the grinders, these, you know, benchtop type tools. And, you know, because there's all this crap on here, and because the surface of the benchtop, of the countertop was so, you know, was just falling apart. You couldn't really drive holes into it and anchor things without ripping stuff out. Anyway, it was time to get rid of that stuff, and I wanted to put in a whole new bench that I could put these benchtop things on and not just be constantly swapping them out here. So that's what the purpose of this whole thing was. So I'll tell you a little, just super briefly about it. I don't want to take too much time talking about the project itself. Basically, you know, I got high quality plywood, you know, 4x8s that cost like 75 bucks a piece, which seems like an insane amount of money to spend on a piece of plywood, but you know, it gives a nice smooth surface. It doesn't have knots and all kinds of stuff that are going to eventually start falling apart. This is not really my primary workspace. That's out in the main part of my shop, but I do work on stuff out here, and so, you know, I want this top to be reasonably durable. So so that's what I did here. Basically took the weekend. All of the posts and stuff are just scrap wood. They're wood from pallets. And then I bought 4 2x4s. So all told, I spent about $150-ish, maybe 200. And you know, there's nothing fancy whatsoever about it. And so it didn't really take me too terribly long to do it. So all my tools are here. So I got that anchored in here, same deal with the bench grinder, that's anchored on here, and then I've got a disc grinder, or disc sander over there. I've also got a bunch of grinders stored underneath here. The reason for that is that I periodically review grinders. That, you know, honestly, I've got a bunch of nice pro grinders over here, but you know, I like to review more entry-level type stuff because you know, everybody didn't have a big budget for grinders. And, you know, I like to do projects, show that you can make a knife with a little 1x30 grinder if you want to. They're not that great, but you can do it. So here's some thoughts that I have about making these things. The first is, before you just go slap happy and start, you know, building stuff, which tends to be the way I work, it's good to think about, you know, exactly what you plan to do with it. If you plan to have tools on top of, you know, electric things like this, you don't want it too high. I mean, personally, I don't like this height of workbench. I guess if you always want to work standing up, I guess it's okay. But I find this kind of cramped, especially when you're using electric tools. And I would in particular mention drill presses. If you put a drill press on a real high platform like this, it's hard to get to the pulleys you need to get to in order to change the speeds. And you know, it just the thing is made to be in this space here, and you're jacking it up to here. So think about that height, you know. If you have a counter or workbench size that that you already are comfortable with and you like, by all means do it. But you'll notice what I did here was this was the existing countertop size, and I dropped down 7-8 inches here because I like this better. And most importantly, I knew I was putting all these tools on here. The tools are all higher than the top the top surface of the table or the workbench, and as a result I'm actually working at kind of the same height as this existing bench. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is how rigid it is. This one uses 4x on the bottom, and that's what I used over here. I just happen to have a bunch of them from some skid for a piece of equipment I got or something. I don't remember why I have them, but I have them. And those kind of posts really make a nice solid workbench. Like I said, I used plywood on the top. I don't think plywood is ideal. The perfect top is more like butcher block or something like that. And in fact, on my workbench that I've got out there, I actually fabricated part of it and out of big old 2x6s or something like that. I don't remember, but it's super heavy and it's a little overbuilt. But it's an L-shaped workbench, and the second part of it is just butcher block that I got from Home Depot. I think it was 120 bucks or something like that. It's not cheap, but compared to, if you buy a pre-made workbench and just assemble it, something that you get at Rockler or someplace like that, it's going to be way more expensive. And so you can build a frame for it out of 2x4s, 4x4s, whatever, make something nice and sturdy, and then just plop that butcher block on top, and it really makes a nice working surface. They're nicely finished, and they're very solid, and most importantly, unlike all these composites and stuff, it's less likely to delaminate and crumble and fall apart over time. Not that it's impossible, but it's less likely than if you're using stuff like this, and most especially MDF or chipboard. Okay, other thoughts. One thing that's super important anytime you're making a workbench is to provide for your power tools. So in this one, I already had, the previous owner had already put a power strip here. I mean, you can go crazy and you can build sockets into the wall. You can put a whole bunch of power strips in the back or whatever. Putting a power strip on the leg of the workbench, I think, is a really good solution for two reasons. If you're principally making stuff out of wood, it's not the end of the world if you get crud into a socket. But knife makers are obviously working with steel all the time, and some other, copper and brass and things like that that are conductive. All those little chips are flying around, and if you have sockets that are exposed up above the workbench, which really is a nice way to do it if you're doing carpentry or something like that, with metal work, there's a good chance of things getting in there and shorting out circuits and catching things on fire. So I really like the idea of having these power strips anchored to the leg of the workbench. Okay, so while we're on the subject of the electrical system, it's a lot easier to add outlets when you don't have all this cabinetry in the way and you're not having to crawl under here and fish wire around it. So if you want to add outlets, you might want to do that before you actually put in the cabinets. Yet another thing that's worth thinking about is storage. You might want to have storage on the top of the counter. You might want to have a rolling tool cart. You might want to have a tool chest of some sort. I mean, there are a million different things. Shelves. So, think about that. I mean, just as a for instance, if you have a tool cart or a tool chest, you want to make sure that you have clearance not just below the tabletop, but below whatever support members that you've got underneath there. Okay, so a lot of people obviously are concerned about cost. like I said, in this particular case, I mean, I didn't build the frame for this side. It was pre-existing, but I did the countertop for this side, for that side, and I got enough left over that I could do one more kind of skinny workbench someplace else. That's a lot of working surface out of about $150 worth of plywood. Of course, you know, there are cheaper alternatives. You can get a cheaper grade of plywood. If you got scrap wood, if you got pallet wood, if you got stuff that got torn out of an old house, you know, countertops or something, you can scrounge your way to an incredibly cheap working surface that's really pretty good. So, you know, don't necessarily think you got to do the Cadillac. You can really make something that's very nice for not too much, you know, scratch. Another thing is I've drilled holes with a Forstner bit in the back of here so that I can run the cables, the power cables for all these things down inside of here and underneath and into that power strip. You know, a million ways you could do that, but I think it's a nice solution. Okay, so that brings me to the wrap up of the show today, which is talking about jigs. So, you know, I put out the Sorrells brick, which is this little jig right here. This is my personal one. As you can see, it's extremely beat up. So I have definitely gotten my use out of this. And then I've also got the original prototype for the Pro set, which is an adjustable jig. So the difference between these is that this one has fixed angles 3, 4, 5, and 7 degrees, and then this one you can set anything between 1 and 18 degrees. And I'm not going to go too much into any of that right now because I've already done videos about it, and I'm sure those of you who watch my channel a lot are bored to death with that. But I've got a few questions that people have asked, and so I thought I would try to address as many of those as I could today. The first question is, why should I buy one of these over the other? And I should mention, you know, this is an adjustable jig. Most jigs, here's a, you know, this is another commercial jig you can buy, Black Dragon Forge jig. Most jigs are like this. Here are the advantages of using this particular jig, and here's why you might want to buy it over the Pro set. It is true that it's not adjustable, but that's part of the beauty of it, is that it's never going to lose the angle that it was set at. There's really, it's just keep it simple, stupid type thing. Also, it has a very small footprint. And so if you're using, you know, like a little Vevor knife grinder, if you're using a Grizzly knife grinder, if you're using Harbor Freight belt grinders, you know, any of that sort of stuff, they have typically fairly small tables. And this has a tiny little footprint as jigs go and is fantastic for that kind of setup. Also, it's made out of steel. It's just a giant block of steel. And as such, it's essentially indestructible. So that is a cool thing about that. And these are all reasons why you might want to get this. Oh, it's also cheap. This obviously is much more complicated, and as a result, it's more expensive. It's got drilled and tapped holes, it's got different pieces, and it's got little machine handles. Just the machine handles here cost me more money than all the material in this. So that's reflected in the fact that this is, you know, more expensive to buy. So that's the first thing. But putting that aside, the big advantage of this is it does every angle between 1 and 18 degrees. And it has a little pin system, so you take this pin out and you move it from place to place, and you can perfectly set each of these angles. Each of these angles is what it says it is. If it says it's a 1, it's a 1. If it says it's a 2, it's 2 degrees. And every time you set it at 2 degrees, it's always going to be 2 degrees. Unlike a lot of, I'm not picking on this particular one, but most adjustable grinding jigs, you can't set it exact, you can't grind at 4 degrees, go make another knife at 7 degrees, and then come back to finish this earlier knife and have it be exactly perfect and match exactly perfectly to those original grinds. This one, always going to be the same. Every time you say 7 degrees, it's 7 degrees, and that's the end of it. So that is a cool feature of this particular jig. Okay, so speaking of pins, another note that I've had from a couple people is that the pins, they've had problems with the pins falling out. I don't know what the deal is, but when I made this prototype, and I actually made several prototypes, tested them all, I never had a pin fall out. But apparently other people have problems with it. So it's something that I do want to address at some point. You know, I probably need some kind of little detent pin or something, but if you've ever priced detent pins, they're insanely expensive. So I don't want to drive up the price of this thing too much. So I'm kind of experimenting with some different possibilities. And in the meantime, my intention is to sell locator pins on Sorrells tool. Strangely enough, the locator pins that I'll be selling are actually exactly the same as the pins that I use for this. I won't get into what locator pins are or why they would be useful to you, but point is, if you do happen to lose a pin, you should be able to replace one from the website. This is a nice big, I consider this to be kind of a professional type jig. And part of that is reflected in the fact that it's big. So, you know, you can put chef's knives and choppers and stuff like that on here. But the downside to that is if you have a very small grinder or even just a big grinder with a very small table, this is not going to fit very well on it. So, you know, that's something else to consider if you have a very small grinder. So those are the basic reasons that you would choose one over the other. Okay, another question is, how do you maintain the knife in a particular orientation? Well, there are two ways. One is to use little bolts, and this has holes that are tapped for 1/4-20 screws. Now, I've had several people who saw me demonstrating this with bolts, and they assumed that I included bolts, and they were a little put out because the one that they got didn't have the bolts that I showed in my little video. The whole point of these screw holes is so that you can do it however you want. If you want to put any kind of screw in here, you can do it. This just happens to be what I like to use. I use these little screws, I run them through there, and I rest them on there, and that's how it works. But you know, these screws are not, or these threaded holes are not here just to do this one thing. They're, you know, you might want to screw your knife on to the face here. There are a ton of different things that you can do with them, and so it's dealer's choice. So I included bolts in a few of them just to be a nice guy, but really there's, you know, you can do this however you want, so they're not bolts included. So if you don't want to use bolts, you can also use the equalizer plunge line guide that I sell and that they sell at Pops, and that'll allow you to stick it down in these little holes, and it'll support it really nicely and repeatably, and you can flip the blade around, and it's always going to be, you know, in the same location. So, you know, with all these holes, you know, my idea is you can come up with your idea of how you'd like to do this. There's no right way to do it. There's no particular bolt, no particular system. If you want to screw it from the front, if you want, you know, if you want to disregard these entirely, you can do that. They're just there for your convenience. All right, guys. Well, I have been blabbing on for quite a while, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up now. But if you get a chance to make it to the Batson show next week, love to see you there. Likewise, the California Bladesmithing Association, and which is the following week. And then, obviously, we got Blade Show in June. I'll have the whole Sorrells tool booth there. Come by and see me. And I'd love to talk to you and share my thoughts about knife making and hear what you're doing. And always just a great time, you know, when you get a chance to meet other knife makers and talk to them about what they're doing. All right, guys, thanks for watching and keep on making those knives.